Imagine building an apartment complex inside a cliff face. No cranes, no power tools, no modern technology whatsoever. Now imagine that apartment complex standing for over 700 years. Still there, still stunning, still defying everything we think we know about primitive peoples. Between 750 and 1300 CE, in one of the harshest environments on Earth, a civilization rose that would build some of the most sophisticated structures in North America. We're talking cities carved into canyon walls, road networks spanning hundreds of miles, astronomical observatories that tracked the sun and moon with pinpoint accuracy. Here's what blows my mind. These weren't simple villages. This was an empire, a civilization that rivaled anything happening in medieval Europe at the same time. You're standing in the Four Corners region right now, where Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico all meet. It's hot. It's dry. Annual rainfall, maybe 10 inches, if you're lucky. Most years, less. This is high desert plateau, carved by deep canyons, topped by flat mesas that stretch to the horizon. This is where they chose to build, not in spite of the harshness, but because of it. The people who built this civilization, we call them the Ancestral Puebloans. You might have heard the name Anasazi, a Navajo word meaning ancient ones or ancient enemies. But here's the thing, they never disappeared. They never vanished mysteriously into the desert like some Indiana Jones movie. They're still here. Modern Pueblo peoples, the Hopi, the Zuni, the 19 Pueblo communities along the Rio Grande, they're the direct descendants. This isn't ancient history that ended. This is a living culture that transformed, adapted, and survived. And what they built, it's about to change everything you think you know about pre-Columbian America.
This was migration. Organized, purposeful migration to places that offered survival. You're a family making this decision. Do you stay in the cliffs where your ancestors lived, where every spring is dry and every field is barren? Or do you go south, where scouts report rivers that flow year-round, where there's timber, where there's game, where there's a future? It's not a choice. Not really. Many moved to the Rio Grande Valley in New Mexico, perennial rivers providing water security they could count on. Others headed to the Little Colorado River area in Arizona. These weren't random destinations. These were strategic relocations to regions with better conditions, warmer temperatures, better farming potential, reliable water, plentiful timber for construction and fuel. And here's what modern Pueblo peoples will tell you. Their oral histories remember these migrations. Stories passed down through generations. Clan histories describing journeys from the north. Migrations that brought different groups together in new locations. The culture didn't end. It transformed. It adapted. It survived. Just like it had done for centuries before, facing previous droughts, previous challenges. The difference this time, the system was too stressed, the population too high, the resources too depleted. So they moved, they survived, they became the Pueblo peoples of today.
Now here's where your mind is about to be completely blown. The Ancestral Puebloans, they were astronomers, sophisticated astronomers. We're talking about people who understood solar cycles, lunar cycles, and celestial mechanics with a precision that rivals ancient cultures anywhere on Earth. You're standing in Chaco Canyon at dawn on the summer solstice. The sun's about to break the horizon. You're watching the eastern sky, and then sunlight streams through a perfectly positioned window in Pueblo Bonito, travels through multiple doorways that only align on this one day of the year, and illuminates a specific spot on a wall where ceremonial leaders stand waiting. This wasn't an accident. This was engineered. The entire canyon, the location itself, was chosen for astronomical reasons. The canyon runs along a lunar alignment line. The majority of great houses, they feature solstice sunrise or sunset horizon alignments, walls oriented to cardinal directions, corners positioned to capture specific celestial events. Here's what's crazy. These weren't just observatories for tracking the seasons. Any farmer can figure out when to plant crops. No, this was something bigger. This was power. Think about it. You're a Chacoan leader. You tell your people, 30 days from now, the sun will stop moving south and begin its return journey north. They wait, they watch, and on the exact day you predicted, it happens. How does that look? What does that mean to people who don't understand orbital mechanics? It means you have a direct connection to the gods. It means you can predict the future. It means you have knowledge that ordinary people don't possess. That's the currency of power in the ancient world. Let me show you something incredible. There's a place called Fajada Butte near Chaco Canyon. On top of this butte, someone, we don't know who, we don't know exactly when, carved a spiral petroglyph into the rock. Then they positioned 3 stone slabs in front of it. On the summer solstice, a single dagger of light pierces through the center of the spiral. On the winter solstice, 2 daggers of light frame the spiral on either side. On the spring and fall equinoxes, the light pattern changes again, marking those events with equal precision. This is 1,400 years before Galileo. This is 1,000 years before European cathedrals started incorporating astronomical alignments. And they did it with stone and sunlight and absolutely brilliant mathematical understanding. You're looking at Pueblo Bonito's curved design right now. It's not random. It's not just aesthetically pleasing. The curve mirrors the journey of the sun from east to west across the sky. The entire building is a 3-dimensional sundial, calendar, observatory, and temple all rolled into one. These people mapped the cosmos with architecture. Okay, so you've got this capital city in the desert. Massive stone structures, astronomical observatories, thousands of people. Now, how do you connect it all? The Ancestral Puebloans built roads, but not trails, not paths worn into the earth by footsteps over time. Engineered roads, 30 feet wide, running perfectly straight for miles regardless of terrain, with stone borders, ramps carved into cliffs, and causeways built across rough ground. Wait, what? You heard that right. The Ancestral Puebloans, people we're told had simple technology, built a road network that connected over 150 outlying communities to Chaco Canyon. We're talking hundreds of miles of roads, some of them visible from space, even today. Here's what makes this insane. These roads go straight. When they hit a cliff, they don't go around it, they carve stairs into the rock face. When they hit a mesa, they build a ramp. When they encounter rough terrain, they construct causeways. Why? Why not just follow the easy path? Because these weren't just transportation routes, these were statements. These were physical manifestations of power stretched across the landscape. When you're traveling these roads toward Chaco, you're not just walking, you're participating in a ritual. You're experiencing the reach of Chacoan authority with every step. And get this, these roads are way wider than necessary for foot traffic. We're talking 30 feet across. That's wider than most modern two-lane highways for people traveling on foot. So what's the deal? Scientists have debated this for decades. Some think the width was ceremonial, processions of pilgrims walking together toward Chaco for great gatherings. Others think it was about moving goods. Imagine caravans of traders carrying turquoise, shells, macaw feathers, pottery, all flowing into Chaco along these highways. But here's the thing, it was probably both and more. You're looking at a road right now, stretching arrow straight toward the horizon, stone borders on both sides. The desert has tried to reclaim it for 1,000 years, but you can still see it, still follow it, still feel the enormity of the effort it took to build this. This is what empire looks like. This is how you project power across a region the size of several modern states. This is infrastructure on a scale that shouldn't exist for a simple prehistoric culture. But there it is, still there, still proving that our assumptions about the past are wrong.
Around 1150 CE, something's changing. Chaco Canyon's power is fading. The ceremonial center that dominated the region for 250 years is declining. Populations are shifting. And that's when the Ancestral Puebloans built their most iconic structures, the cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde. You're standing at the edge of a canyon in southwestern Colorado. You're looking across at the opposite wall, maybe 300 feet away, and tucked into a massive natural alcove in that cliff face is a city. Wait, what? I'm talking about multi-story buildings, dozens of rooms, ceremonial kivas, storage facilities, hundreds of people living in structures built into the cliff face, protected by an overhanging rock shelter the size of a football field. The most famous, Cliff Palace, 150 rooms, 23 kivas, multiple stories high, and it's hanging on the side of a cliff. How? Why? Let's start with the why, because here's where it gets interesting. These cliff dwellings weren't built in the 900s or thousands when times were good. They were built between 1150 and 1300 CE, a period of increasing stress, resource competition, and conflict. The cliffs offered protection. They're defensible. You can see anyone approaching from miles away. There's only a few ways up, and they're easy to guard. If violence is increasing across the region, and archaeological evidence suggests it was, then suddenly living in a cliff face makes perfect sense. But there's more. These alcoves are naturally climate controlled. I'm not kidding, it's brilliant engineering by nature, exploited by human ingenuity. The overhanging rock, it shields the dwellings from rain and snow. The southern exposure captures winter sun, warming the structures when it's cold. But in summer, when the sun is higher in the sky, that same overhang creates shade, keeping the dwellings cool. Natural heating and cooling, built in. Now, here's what amazes me, the construction itself. You're building multi-story structures inside a cliff alcove with limited space. Every stone has to be shaped, carried, and fitted into place. Mortar has to be mixed and applied. Wooden beams have to be transported and positioned. Walls have to be plastered with adobe and painted. And you're doing all this while living vertically on a cliff face. Your water source? Springs at the canyon bottom, 400 feet down. Your fields? Mesa tops, 400 feet up. Every single day you're climbing, carrying water up, carrying crops down, raising children in this environment, building, maintaining, surviving. And they did this for over a century. Mesa Verde preserves 600 cliff dwellings,
600, from tiny one-room structures to massive complexes housing over 100 people. Here's my favorite detail. Those distinctive T-shaped doorways you see everywhere at Mesa Verde, they're not just aesthetic. The wider bottom allows people to carry large loads through. The narrower top reduces heat loss in winter. Form follows function, and it looks beautiful. You're standing inside a cliff dwelling room right now. Run your hand along the plastered wall. It's smooth, decorated with painted geometric designs. A wooden ladder leads up to another level. Through the doorway, you can see the canyon stretching into the distance. This isn't primitive. This is sophisticated. This is humans adapting to extreme circumstances and creating something remarkable in the process.
Let me ask you a question. What's the one thing you absolutely need to survive? Water. Now, imagine trying to build a civilization in a place that gets less than 10 inches of rain per year. Most years, less than 8. Where summer temperatures hit over 100 degrees, where droughts can last for decades. This is the challenge the ancestral Puebloans faced every single day. And here's the thing that blows my mind. They don't just survive, they thrived. They supported populations in the thousands. They grew surplus crops. They built cities. How? Through water engineering that was absolutely brilliant. You're standing on a mesa top at Mesa Verde right now, looking at what seems like just rocks scattered across the landscape. But look closer. Those aren't random rocks. Those are checkdowns, carefully constructed stone barriers built across drainage channels. When the summer thunderstorms hit, and in the southwest, they hit hard, water comes rushing down these channels with incredible force. These check dams slow that water down. They prevent erosion. They allow water to soak into the soil instead of just rushing away. Below the check dams, agricultural terraces, level planting surfaces with stone borders, creating perfect conditions for crops. The water is captured, controlled, and used. At Chaco Canyon, the system is even more sophisticated. Great houses feature elaborate drainage systems with channels built into the walls and floors. Water is directed, collected, and stored in massive stone-lined reservoirs. Some of these reservoirs could hold tens of thousands of gallons. Every drop was precious. Every drop was engineered. Here's what's incredible. They weren't just managing water, they were managing crops with precision that modern scientists respect. The three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, grown together in a system called companion planting. The corn provides a stalk for beans to climb. The beans fix nitrogen in the soil, fertilizing the corn. The squash spreads across the ground, shading the soil and preventing moisture loss, while its spiky leaves deter pests. This is agricultural science developed through generations of careful observation. And they developed drought-resistant strains of corn through selective breeding. Seeds passed down through families, through generations, each one adapted to survive with minimal water. This wasn't luck. This was botanical engineering. They created grid gardens, small recessed plots protected by low walls that created microclimates, less wind, less evaporation, more moisture retention. At its peak, this system supported around 20,000 people across the Mesa Verde region alone. Chaco Canyon, several thousand residents in the canyon itself, with tens of thousands more in the surrounding region. You're looking at a civilization that turned one of North America's harshest environments into productive farmland through pure ingenuity.
You think you know where this story is going. Ancient people, Southwest desert, isolated communities struggling to survive. Wrong. Completely wrong. The Ancestral Puebloans were connected to a trade network that spanned thousands of miles, from the Pacific coast to the Gulf of Mexico, from the Great Plains to deep into Mesoamerica. How do we know? Because archaeologists found proof. You're standing in a burial chamber at Pueblo Bonito right now. The room is small, ceremonial, and lying before you are over 10,000 pieces of turquoise. 10,000 pieces. Turquoise from mines in New Mexico. Turquoise from Nevada, 600 miles away. Possibly turquoise from Mexico, over 1,000 miles to the south. All of it here. All of it worked into beads, pendants, and inlay decorations. This isn't small-time operation. This is industrial-scale trade and production. But wait, there's more. In other rooms at Chaco, macaws. Live, tropical macaws and their brilliant feathers. These birds are native to Mexico, over 1,000 miles away through desert, mountains, and hostile territory. How do you transport live exotic birds across 1,000 miles on foot? And here's what's insane. They didn't just import them. Archaeological evidence shows breeding pens at Chaco. They were raising these birds, breeding them, harvesting their feathers for ceremonial use. These weren't pets. These were sacred objects, living symbols of connection to distant tropical worlds. Shells. Shells from both coasts, Pacific abalone, Gulf of Mexico conch, worked into jewelry, inlaid into wooden objects, crafted into ceremonial items. Copper bells from Mesoamerica, made using the lost wax casting technique, a sophisticated metallurgical process. Obsidian from volcanic sources hundreds of miles away, worked into tools and ceremonial blades. And get this, cacao, the source of chocolate, found at Chaco Canyon, imported from Mexico. They had chocolate in the desert over 1,000 years ago. Now let's talk about art, because what they created was stunning. The pottery, black on white geometric designs that are so distinctive, so refined, that museums around the world display them as masterpieces. Each pot, hand-built using the coil method, painted with yucca leaf brushes and mineral pigments, fired in outdoor kilns to temperatures over 1,500 degrees. These weren't just containers. These were works of art. Textiles woven from cotton grown locally, blankets with intricate designs, clothing, ceremonial garments, some baskets woven so tightly they could hold water, sandals woven from yucca fibers with complex patterns that show individual artistic expression. And the architecture itself, that's art on the grandest scale. Great houses with symmetrical layouts, precisely coursed masonry with different patterns, some blocks horizontal, some diagonal, creating a visual texture. Plastered surfaces painted with geometric designs and symbolic imagery. You're looking at a civilization with artists, professional craftspeople, traders, long-distance merchants, economic specialists. This isn't simple. This is complex. This is sophisticated social organization on par with ancient civilizations anywhere in the world. Here's a question that makes archaeologists uncomfortable. Were the ancestral Puebloans equal? Was this a society where everyone had the same status, the same power, the same access to resources? The evidence says no. Absolutely not. This was a hierarchical society. There were elites. There were commoners. There was inequality. And we know this because of burials. You're standing in Pueblo Bonito, a structure with over 600 rooms that housed hundreds of people over its occupation. Guess how many burials archaeologists have found there? 50. Maybe 60? Where is everyone else? Most people were buried elsewhere, outside the great houses, in the surrounding areas. But a select few, they got buried inside, in special rooms, with incredible grave goods. One burial contained over 10,000 pieces of turquoise. Another had wooden staffs inlaid with turquoise and shell. Macaw remains, cylinder jars, special pottery forms associated with ritual, shell trumpets, ceremonial objects. These people were special, elite, powerful. Other burials, nothing. No grave goods, just the body. This is social hierarchy, written in bones and buried treasure. So what did daily life look like depending on where you fell in this hierarchy? If you're elite, part of the families that control Chaco, you live in rooms within the great houses, you participate in ceremonies, you possess astronomical knowledge that ordinary people don't have. You control trade relationships with distant regions. You are connected to sources of power, ritual, economic, political. But if you're a commoner, your life is hard, physically hard. You're farming mesa tops in the brutal sun. You're grinding corn for hours every day. And we know this because skeletal analysis shows distinctive wear patterns on women's bodies. Their forearms, their knees, their spines. All from kneeling at grinding stones, pushing stone against stone, turning corn kernels into flour. Hour after hour, day after day, year after year. Men hunt, they build, they maintain structures, they transport materials, they work stone and wood. Children help from young ages carrying water, gathering firewood, learning the skills they'll need to survive in this harsh environment. And at the center of religious and social life, the kivas, these circular, semi-subterranean chambers where ceremonies happen, where men gather, where the spiritual and social fabric of the community is woven and maintained. Great kivas at Chaco could hold hundreds of people. These were community gathering spaces for ceremonies that brought people together from across the region. You're sitting in a kiva right now. The fire crackles in the central pit, smoke drifts up through the roof opening, sunlight streams down, creating a shaft of light in the darkness. Around you, community members sit in silence, watching a ceremony unfold. This is where stories are told, where knowledge is passed down, where the next generation learns who they are and where they come from. This is the heartbeat of ancestral Puebloan society.
For over 300 years, the ancestral Pueblanos dominated the Southwest. They built cities, they engineered water systems, they created trade networks spanning thousands of miles. And then, it all fell apart. Not overnight, not suddenly, but generation by generation, the system began to crumble. You're standing in Chaco Canyon in the year 1130 CE. Something's wrong. The summer rains didn't come last year, or the year before. Springs that always flowed are running dry. Crops are failing. Stored food reserves are getting low. It's just a drought. Droughts happen. This will pass. But it doesn't pass.
Year after year, the rains fail. Tree ring data, one of the most reliable methods we have for reconstructing ancient climate, tells us this drought lasted 50 years. 50 years. Chaco's power declines. Populations shift. The great gatherings become less frequent. The roads fall into disuse. The ceremonial center that once drew thousands starts to empty. But that's just the beginning. In 1275 CE, something catastrophic begins. The Great Drought, the worst drought in over 1,000 years, and it lasts for 20 years. 20 years of failed crops, 20 years of dried springs, 20 years of desperation. You're farming on a mesa top. You've planted your corn, seeds passed down through generations, drought-resistant varieties your ancestors developed. You've built your check dams and terraces. You've done everything right. And the rains don't come. Your corn withers, your beans die, your squash shrivels in the field. Your children are hungry. Your stored food from last year is running out. And next year doesn't look any better. But here's the thing. The drought was just one part of a perfect storm of disasters. Centuries of intensive farming have degraded the soil. Erosion has carved gullies through field systems. Deforestation, all that timber harvested for great house construction, has altered local environments, making them even drier. And populations have grown to levels that stressed resources even in good years. When the drought hits, the system can't absorb the shock. It collapses. Archaeological evidence from this period is disturbing. Burned structures, bodies left unburied, defensive walls and towers built hastily, signs of violence. When resources become scarce, when survival is at stake, conflict erupts. Communities that once traded with each other go to war. Social networks break down. The cooperative systems that sustained large populations, they can't survive the pressure. By 1300 CE, Mesa Verde is empty. The Four Corners region is abandoned. The great cliff dwellings stand silent. But here's what's critical to understand. This wasn't a mysterious disappearance. This wasn't some inexplicable vanishing act.
So let me tell you what didn't happen. The Ancestral Puebloans didn't mysteriously vanish. They didn't get abducted by aliens. They didn't disappear without a trace into the desert sunset. They're right here. They've been here the whole time. You're standing in a modern Pueblo community in New Mexico. Adobe buildings rise multiple stories high, shared walls, plaza-centered layout, the same architectural principles used at Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon over 1,000 years ago. In the plaza, a ceremonial dance is happening. Dancers in traditional regalia moving in patterns passed down through countless generations. Drums beating rhythms that echo back through centuries. This is the legacy. This is the continuation. 19 Pueblo communities in New Mexico, the Hopi villages in Arizona. These are the descendants. Direct, unbroken cultural continuity from the Ancestral Puebloans to today. And they'll tell you something important. Those ruins we call Mesa Verde, Chaco Canyon, the cliff dwellings, those aren't abandoned relics of a dead civilization. Those are sacred sites. Those are the homes of their ancestors. Those places hold spiritual significance, ceremonial importance, and living connections to the past. Many Pueblo oral histories include migration stories,
clans coming from the north, describing the building of great stone cities, telling of droughts and journeys and the eventual gathering of different groups in new locations. The story never ended. It just moved. The term Anasazi, many modern Pueblo peoples don't like it. It's a Navajo word, sometimes interpreted as having negative connotations. Ancestral Puebloans is more accurate because it describes what's true. These are the ancestors of living people with living cultures. This matters. This isn't just archaeology. These aren't just interesting ruins to visit on vacation. This is someone's history, someone's ancestors, someone's sacred places. And the innovations, they didn't disappear either. Adobe construction, used across the Southwest today. Multi-story pueblos with shared walls, you see them at Taos Pueblo, occupied continuously for over 1,000 years. Plaza-centered village layouts, kiva ceremonial chambers still used for ceremonies closed to outsiders. Agricultural techniques, terracing, water harvesting, drought-resistant crops, these informed sustainable farming practices in arid regions that we still use today. But here's what really gets me. Here's the lesson that transcends time and culture and geography. The ancestral Puebloans show us what humans can achieve. In one of the most challenging environments on Earth, they built urban centers with thousands of inhabitants. They engineered sophisticated water systems. They created trade networks spanning thousands of miles. They built structures that have stood for over 1,000 years. They studied the cosmos and encoded that knowledge in stone and architecture. But they also remind us of vulnerability. Even successful civilizations, societies with advanced technology, complex social organization, and centuries of accumulated knowledge can face environmental changes that force transformation. Climate change, resource depletion, population pressure. These aren't just modern concerns. These are timeless human challenges. The ancestral Puebloans faced these challenges. They adapted when they could. And when adaptation in place became impossible, they moved. They found new homes. They rebuilt. They survived. That's not failure. That's resilience. The ruins they left behind, they stand as monuments to human ingenuity, cultural complexity, and the deep, deep history of North America. Thousands of years of sophisticated civilizations existing long before European contact. They challenge our assumptions about primitive peoples. They force us to recognize achievement where we weren't taught to look for it. They remind us that history is far richer, far more complex, and far more impressive than the simplified narratives we learned in school. Walk through Chaco Canyon today. Stand beneath those massive walls. Look up at those perfectly positioned windows that captured the solstice sun. Touch the stones that human hands shaped and placed over 1,000 years ago. You're not looking at a dead civilization. You're looking at the ancestors of people who are still here, still maintaining traditions, still speaking languages connected to the ancient past, still dancing ceremonies in plazas that echoed the great gathering places of Chaco Canyon. The story of the ancestral Puebloans isn't a tragedy. It's not a mystery. It's not an ending. It's a testament to human resilience, adaptation, and the continuation of culture across generations, across migrations, across 1,000 years of change. And that story, it's still being written right now, today.